from being a devoted husband and loving father to becoming a serial killer. But why was there a change in character? Was it due to life pressure or psychological challenges nobody was aware of? On the other hand, Anthony escapes without serving any time in jail. Can the law enforcement be able to track him down to pay for the terrifying and horrible things he did? Well, stick with us till the end to find out, as this is the battle between a serial killer and a protective father. Vertical bar, the case of Tiffany Shore. The loving beginning of Anthony Shore. Tiffany and her older sister Amber live comfortably in Houston with their parents, Anthony and Gina. The man is an established musician who performs in several local jazz bands. He manages to devote a lot of time with his two young girls, despite his day work as a landline repairman and his musical profession. But underneath that flawless exterior, the family is not without troubles. Gina and Anthony fight frequently, and their marriage began to fall apart. She eventually met another man and sought for divorce. She didn't want Anthony or her daughters in her life, so she gave him full custody. Tiffany, on the other hand, enjoyed her father and didn't mind living with him because he was entertaining, clever, and creative.
We would go to like the Renaissance Fair or do art or just always something fun.
However, Tiffany was unaware that something ominous was lurking in the area, the unsolved murdered cases. Two young girls had been killed near her home in the years before.
It may not be as safe as it used to be, so there was some concern among the community about the possible dangers to their children.
Lori Trembley, a 14-year-old Central Houston teenager, went missing on Thursday, September 26, 1986. The next day, the police found her body. She was discovered strangled to death in the parking lot of a restaurant, behind the dumpster.
Lori Trembley was found in the parking lot of a restaurant behind a dumpster and had been strangled to death.
The only piece of evidence they have is her cause of death, which suggests she was strangled with a rope or cord. With nothing else to go on, the investigation swiftly becomes cold. At roughly 10 a.m. on Thursday, April 16, 1992, a delivery man arrives into the West Houston Dairy Queen parking lot. When he got out of his van, he came across a dead body near the drive-thru. The authorities, on the other hand, carefully investigated the body and discovered visible traces of sexual assault. In addition, a tourniquet-like item is discovered embedded in the victim's neck.
This wasn't some sort of like impulse, grabbing somebody by the throat and strangling them. Somebody put some thought and effort into this.
The rest of the day was spent by police investigating the crime scene and collecting DNA samples. Maria's fingernail clippings were collected and saved for future use. While they were working, an unexpected visitor appears at the area.
Her father actually goes down to the scene where police are still, documenting evidence, and he identifies her.
Maria del Carmen Estrada was a young Hispanic woman who worked as a nanny in Spring Branch and the surrounding area. The news that the killer used a handmade weapon in the attack sparked a surge of anxiety in the community. Because the region was crime-ridden, there were home invasions, where people were getting mugged and robbed, and others were frightened to even leave their houses. Her death and an increase in overall crime in the area placed the town on edge. The serial killer or protective father. This is also true of the Shores. However, Anthony, who is now a single father, goes far in his efforts to protect his girl. He was basically convinced that if they were trapped inside the house, nothing awful would happen to them.
Basically just convinced that nothing bad would happen to us if we were locked inside the house. Don't go outside because someone might kidnap you. In reality, I think the worst thing out there was probably him. He was the worst person in the neighborhood.
But as time passed, Anthony proved himself to be far more deadly than he appeared. As the tourniquet killer's attacks became closer and closer to their house, Anthony pulled the kids out of school, nailed shut his doors and windows, and confined his daughters, Tiffany and Amber, inside his house. He bolted down the windows in their room and threatened that they would get kidnapped if they goes outdoors. Anthony's relationship with his daughters deteriorates as the situation outside the house worsens. He grew more authoritarian and manipulative, obsessed with order and perfection. His daughters came to fear him since he was always on edge, never knowing when he might lash out next. Their hair had to look a certain way, and their looks had to be immaculate and flawless at all times. They have to speak and act in a certain way.
And our appearance had to be spotless and perfect all of the time. We had to talk and act a particular way. Everything was just like a show, but if it doesn't go the way he planned it, then all hell breaks loose. And everybody suffers in the house for it.
To them, everything was just a show. But if things don't go as planned, all hell breaks out and everyone in the house suffers as a result. But why was he keeping his daughters indoors? Was it some sort of punishment or protection? Before we continue the thrilling case, to join our investigation, please subscribe to our channel, Unsolved Files. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Let's unsolve this mystery together. Now back to Tiffany's case. The infamous Houston tourniquet killer, Anthony, claimed to have attacked over 60 girls using his characteristic weapon, a handmade ligature known as a tourniquet. As his list of victims became longer, the community's fear reached unprecedented heights. Many folks went above and beyond to protect their children. However, Anthony Shore, a single father raising 2 girls, completely succumbed to his paranoia. Anthony had a high reputation in the neighborhood, and many applauded him for remaining calm in the middle of chaos. 2 extensively mediatized crimes exploded the neighborhood just a few months after the daughters moved in with their father. First, a masked man attacked 14-year-old Selma Janske after she was dropped off at school.
We turn to breaking news in North Harris County in connection to a violent home invasion there.
Selma identified her attacker as a white male with blue eyes, but the fact that she survived the attack misled the authorities. Also, Diana Rebelar, a 9-year-old girl, went lost on August 7, 1994. Her parents sent her to the neighborhood mom-and-pop grocery store a few minutes away from their house to get sugar. However, her frightened mother went to seek for her 30 minutes later. She raced back to the home, frantic. Diana was gone, so she told her husband to call 911. Police carry out a neighborhood search and deploy many aircraft in and around Houston within hours of her disappearance. The search for the missing 9-year-old was handed over to the night shift as the sun sets. They were told to keep an eye out for a young girl, so shortly after midnight, a police officer went to investigate an abandoned warehouse. As he approached, he directed his attention to some cargo docks and dumpsters in the distance. He noticed what appeared to be a tiny body, at which point homicide detectives arrived and proceeded to check the body. The forensic team discovers something unusual about Diana's body right away. Another improvised tourniquet is knotted around her neck. Even if the police try to keep this information to themselves, the story was soon picked up by the media. But what was Anthony's gain in all these killings? What was he hiding? And why did he choose a tourniquet as a weapon anyways? At the time, the police were unaware that all of the cases were linked, but they quickly realized that Diana's and Maria's killings were most likely perpetrated by the same person. As the situation in the neighborhood worsens, Anthony's anxiety grows to new heights. The girls are no longer permitted to leave the house. During the week, they were sometimes allowed to go to school, but were generally kept at home. On weekends, they play a game called Pretend Rock Band together, the manipulating and molesting method of Anthony's daughters. Anthony dressed the girls and urged them to dance around the house to loud music. The girls, who are only 10 years old, are unaware that their father has ulterior goals. The evening hot chocolate is another of Anthony's family traditions. Initially, only Amber, the older of the two, is permitted to drink it, but he finally offers some to Tiffany as well. But, unfortunately, the next thing they knew, it was morning. They were actually being drugged. As the year progresses, Anthony begins to give Tiffany hot chocolate more frequently, many times each week. As a result, she progressively grew used to the drug's effects. She was scared by what was happening to her the first time she awoke in the middle of the night. She was losing consciousness. She recalls waking up to find herself completely naked and her father doing strange things to her. Because she was afraid, she faked to be asleep. Tiffany was too terrified and embarrassed to confide in her sister about the near-daily abuse, despite the fact that she and her sister generally share everything and rely on each other. Tiffany felt she was protecting Amber by not telling her about it. How an anonymous caller was almost exposed. Barbara Robertson, the editor of a local news station, receives an anonymous call shortly before noon on Friday, July 14, 1995.
His first words were, "I have a tip for you. There's a serial killer on the loose."
Unbeknownst to Barbara, a 16-year-old girl called Dana had gone missing 9 days before. The police immediately labeled her as a runaway and dismissed her parents' complaint because she wasn't living with them at the time. The caller disclosed the location of a deceased body.
By calling the television station, telling them where the body could be located, hanging up, and they're having no way to connect all the dots back to the perpetrator, which was him.
Barbara continues to interrogate him, despite not knowing who he is referring to. The caller went into great detail about how the body was laid in a 37-minute talk. However, as soon as they branded the caller a murderer, he hung up. She contacts a North Harris sheriff and drives to the department to give him a statement. The officers followed the caller's instructions to a dead-end road north of Houston, past the I-45. They find the emplacement he described to Barbara right away. However, after 10 days outside, the body is unidentifiable. The forensics team identified 2 pieces of evidence. The first object discovered was a makeshift tourniquet that was stuck in the victim's neck. A set of rings discovered on the victim's finger is the second piece of evidence. According to the autopsy report, the body was abandoned about a week ago, and the victim was assessed to be around 16 years old. After comparing the timeline and age to missing person reports, the only person who met both criteria was Dana Sanchez. The investigators can now clearly see the killer's method of operation after adding this case to their backlog. In a final option, they put together a task team that consists of the Harris County Sheriff's Department and the Houston Police Department to reopen every single case. They concluded they definitely had a serial killer on the loose, so they enlist everyone's help in trying to figure out what was going on. Within the Shore's home, 2 years after the final victim was discovered, a significant shift occurs. After Anthony's girlfriend moved in, he asked the daughters to spend the summer away from the house. So he asked Gina Shore, his sister, to take them to their mother's house in California. Gina takes advantage of the chance since she sensed a problem in their home. She's reported him to Child Protective Services twice already. First, when she made her first visit to his new house in 1993. However, Child Protective Services dismissed it with extreme haste. They gave her the impression that she was exaggerating. She spent Christmas, 1995, 2 years later, at our house. She was upset to see that things had somehow gotten worse since her last visit when she came. In addition to Gina's second complaint, Tiffany's teachers had already contacted Child Protective Services the year before, and Anthony had once again deceived them as he were tricking everyone. Gina attempted to get her nieces to talk about Anthony and their circumstances in Houston while they were back in California, but they remained reticent and closed off. She asked Tiffany a question out of the blue one day near the end of the summer, and what Tiffany disclosed afterwards shocked her to her bones. Tiffany eventually confided in her aunt and told her about all the abuses and harassment she had been subjected to in the hands of her father. To inform them of the situation, Gina called together Tiffany, her sister Amber, and their grandma Deanna. At that point, Amber eventually shares her side of the story. After that, Gina and Deanna went ahead and reported Anthony to the police. However, the system let them down once more. It is inappropriate for sexual offenders to live next to an elementary school, which he wasn't supposed to. He only needed to report that he had abused his girls. Anthony escapes without serving any time in jail, since he is now on the sex offender list. His only requirement is to give the state a sample of his DNA, which he did. 5 years later, as response to the opening of a state-of-the-art DNA facility in Dallas, the Harris Sheriff's Department decides to investigate the tourniquet murderer cases, focusing on Maria del Carmen Estrada, the only victim who was found with unidentified DNA on her nails. Skin or blood was found under the fingernails as a result of the struggle and clawing that occurred during an attack, particularly involving the little child Maria. However, they were running low on samples after revisiting her case twice, so this might be their final opportunity. How Anthony Shore was finally caught and arrested. On Thursday, October 16, 2003, 11-year-old breakthrough finally materializes. Remarkably, a match was found, and it was a man in Houston. Her fingernail DNA profile was flawless and matched Anthony Shore's swab DNA profile precisely. Investigators detained and questioned Anthony right away. He acknowledges everything. He even closes the unfinished business with Lori Trembley, his initial victim, who the authorities never connected to the tourniquet murderer, due to the fact that it deviates from his typical MO. With composure, he admitted to killing Maria, Lori, Dana, and Diana. He also admitted to assaulting the 14-year-old. The arrest was being covered by the Texas news circuit at this time.
To the killings of Maria, Lori, Dana, and Diana, and he also confessed to the raping of the 14-year-old.
At this point, Tiffany, who was now 18, got a call from Amber, who had just returned to Houston, identifying their father as a serial killer.
I answered the phone and I was like, hey, and she was like, hey, Dad's a serial killer. Like, I don't even think she sugarcoated it in any way, shape, or form.
Tiffany returns to Houston to testify against her father as the trial was about to begin. When the policemen finally got to see the girl who played a key role in solving the crime, they are amazed.
Tiffany broke this entire case wide open because she had the courage to stand up and tell law enforcement.
Tiffany's bravery in coming forward and telling the police everything was what blew the case wide open. The death penalty was what the prosecution seeks. They therefore assemble Tiffany, Amber, and Selma, the only survivors they had, the execution of Anthony by lethal injection. Meanwhile, Anthony Allen Shore entered the courtroom, where his capital murder trial was expected to take place for the first time.
Anthony Allen Shore, for the first time, walked into the courtroom that's likely to be the scene of his capital murder trial.
Anthony Shore was put to death by lethal injection on January 18, 2018. The ordeal Tiffany endured did not abruptly end with her father's execution. Rather, it was merely one more phase in her ongoing recuperation process. But she was happy to be able to finally see herself not as a victim, but rather as someone who survived, thanks to therapy and her family's support. Following the experience, Tiffany relocates to Arizona to raise her own daughter as a single parent, giving her all the love and support she requires to grow and prosper. Tiffany studied forensic science while working as a sheriff's deputy and then enlisting in the Air National Guard. She intends to change the system from the inside and wants to make a difference. In actuality, one person cannot change the world, but perhaps things can improve if more people are aware of the issues and more compassionate individuals are gradually included into the system. However, Anthony Shore stated that he had assaulted at least 60 girls between 1986 and 2003 before his death, but currently, nothing is known about the remaining 53. The monster that was Anthony Allen Shore is officially over. It is undoubtedly puzzling how a father can become a monster in the span of a single day. But do you really believe Anthony was guarding his daughters? Leave your comment. Also, check out this video to see how a 12YO escapes death cult minutes before massacre vertical bar the case of Tracy Parks. Enjoy and see you in our next video.